Hi, and welcome to completing your Johari Employee Relationship Self-Assessment. The Johari Self-Assessment stands for Dr. Joseph Luft and Harry Ingham, who did this work back in the 60s and the 70s about the importance of employee relationships. The goal or the outcome of the self-assessment assignment is it's all about effective employee relationships that are critical to a manager or a leader's success. Where most management actions or behaviors will influence the building and the maintenance of mutually effective relationships, two specific major behaviors significantly affect relationships. The Johari assessment, as I said, developed by Drs. Joseph Luft and Harry Ingham, provides a measurement individual profile of these two major behaviors or skills. These behaviors or skills are key in building and maintaining trust. So the goal or the outcome of this particular assignment is that by completing the Johari self-assessment, you will understand how you exercise currently two major relationship skills and the effect or the implications of these in your interactions with colleagues and your employees. So let's go ahead and begin. The materials that you will need to complete this assessment are shown below. There are 4 of them. The Johari Employee Relationship Self-Assessment. There are 3 sections to that. It comprises of 6 pages. And then the scoring profile, which is attached to the back of it, is 2 pages. The second item that you will need is the Johari Window Self-Assessment Directions. This is 1 page. Even though I will be giving you audio directions for those, this page is helpful in referring back. The third item is the Johari window itself. This is a 1-page graphic illustration. You'll go to this particular page after you've completed the self-assessment and you start the interpretation of your assessment. The fourth item then is interpreting the Johari window, and that's 1 page. And that again you'll use after you have completed and scored the entire self-assessment. These materials should have been provided to you in class. They're available at Dr. Zelko's office. They also can be found in your Blackboard for this particular week under Resources for the assignment. Okay, so let's go ahead and begin. This, by the way, is 6 steps. It's not near as complicated as what you've been through when you went through the MDQ, the Management Development Questionnaire, which was 10 steps and required a lot of transferring and then translation of data. This is much simpler. Okay, now we're ready to begin. Okay, so in step 1, you're going to obtain the Johari window instructions and self-assessment documents. They look as follows. This is the questionnaire itself, of which there are 3 sections as we mentioned earlier. Section 1 is relationships with employee, consists of 20 questions. Section 2 is relationships with colleagues or peers, 20 questions with that. And section 3 is relationship with superiors. That would be your supervisor and other officials above your supervisor. And again, 20 questions with that. Over here on the right, you can see what the Johari window self-assessment directions looks like. Again, you can refer to this at any point, but I will be taking you through the entire process step by step. So let's start with the actual directions. With your self-assessment document, this is how you will be completing it for all of the questions in all of the sections. As it says here, you read each situation Here's the situation. If an employee of mine had a personality conflict with a manager of another department with whom cooperation was important in order for the work to get done, I would, and you then have two choices, an A or a B. Now how you score which choice, you're actually scoring both of them, and you have a total of 5 points to distribute between these two choices. A 5 would indicate, as you see here, that this particular response is completely characteristic of what you would do. Now, if you're not currently a manager having employees, then assume what you most likely would do. So your point ranges here, as you can see, is 5 points for completely characteristic, 4 points for considerably characteristic of what you would do, 3 slightly more characteristic of what you do, 2 rarely characteristic of what you do, 1 point for very rarely characteristic, and then a 0 that you would not do that at all. As you can see here in the example, you may give a 5 in one particular response, the A response, and a 0 for the other. So this would indicate that A would be completely characteristic of what you would do in this situation, and then the B one would be that you would not use that one at all. You can see there's combinations here. You could have a 2 and a 3. So the 2 would indicate, well, in the C response, I may very well say that that is rarely characteristic of me, and in the D response, I give it a 3 because that's slightly more characteristic. The important thing to remember is that you're distributing 5 points in each question set of answers. So these two, whatever they are, must add up to 5. So 4 and 1, 5 and 0, 3 and 2, you get the picture. So, well, let's look at an example of how you're going to go ahead and complete your questionnaire, your self-assessment. As you see here in this example, we are with section 1, relationship with employees, and here is a sample of some of the questions within this particular section. Note that I have put the key up here for you, so it's easy to refer to as we go through this example. You may want to have your key available as you're completing each of the question sets, although you'll probably get into a good groove and be able to do it without looking back at the key after just a few questions. This particular section, just so we're clear, is about relationships with employees. And as it states here in a little blurb, I won't read all of it to you, as a manager, you know that your relationship with employees can significantly influence the success of your management. And all relationships hold potential good or bad, or effective or ineffective handling. So you're given a scenario, or a question, if you will. There'll be 20 of them in this section, in which you're going to read it and then determine would you do more of A or more of B, and to what degree. That's what you're going to be doing. Now, as we covered earlier in the directions, you have 5 points to distribute with each question. So between A and B, whatever responses that you have a greater preference toward, you're going to put in points here, and these two must equal a total of 5. Now, let's just say maybe you do not have employees reporting to you. Do not skip this section. Go ahead and complete it anyway, thinking that, well, if I did, which in this particular situation of these choices would I be more apt to do or not to do, and to what degree? All right, so even if you don't have employees reporting to you, assume that you do, and how would you then respond? So let's look at this example using question 1 in this case. If an employee of mine had a personality conflict with a manager of another department with whom cooperation was important in order for the work to get done, I would what? So I would read A and I would read B, and I would determine out of A and B which one of those probably is more characteristic of me and to what degree. So I'm going to say that for me, A, tell my employee that I felt he or she was partially responsible for any conflict with this other person and try to indicate how the other person was being affected. I would give myself a 4 in this, 4 points, because that is most considerably characteristic of what I would do. So think of it this way. Probably the majority of the time this situation occurred, this is how I would respond to that employee. Now, given that I've given it a 4, and we know this can only total a 5, that leaves what? The B to be a 1, and that now equals 5. This obviously could be a 3 and a 2, or a 2 and a 3, a 5 and a 0. You come up with a combination reading each of these possibilities as to what degree of characteristic response would you give. Again, here's a 4 and a 1. I've indicated here for question 2, or the scenario 2, and question or scenario number 3, how I might respond to those. I'll just do one more. In this particular case, I might avoid making matters worse by calling attention. I might give that a 2 for myself because that is very characteristic of what I would do. And then that leaves a 3 for the C, and again it equals 5. So this is what you are going to do. You're going to take time now to read through each of the questions or scenarios and make your selections, distributing 5 points amongst the responses to that question. So I'm going to let you do that. Okay, so welcome back. You should have completed the entire questionnaire, the self-assessment, all of the pages of the questions, which just showing you here would have been relationships with employees, situations dealing with that, relationships with colleagues, and relationships with superiors. And again, each of these sections had, as you've just gone through, 20 sets of questions for each. So this is just showing you now that you should have completed all of this. So now we're ready to move on. So we're moving to step 3, which is you want to obtain the scoring profile 2 sheets to prepare for the scoring of the self-assessment. So now reach or grab those documents, and those documents should be the scoring instructions. It looks like this. This will be some of the last pages in your assessment document, and this, which is where you'll put the scores down and you'll translate those scores into percentiles, and then you'll actually be grafting the results on these, we call them windows, and that's why we call it the Johari window, because when you're done you will have graphed these and you'll actually have window panes. So that's where we're headed. So let's move along. So step 4, which is beginning the scoring self-assessment of the raw scores, we call this step 4A. The directions for this is that you're going to take each section that yielded exposure score and feedback scores, and you're going to obtain these scores and you're going to add them up, which will be raw scores, and enter the scores in these boxes here. So here's the raw scores, and here is section 1. So you're going to go through the raw scores that you indicated, all those 5s, 3s, and 1s, and you're going to put them here. So you're going to total up all the A's in this section and put that total number here, and then you're going to add up all of the C's and put that number here as well. So let's just imagine that I added up all of my A's in section A and I came up with a total of 41. So that's a combination of 3s and 5s and 4s or whatever for all of the A boxes. I then added up all of the C boxes and I came up with a score of 31. I would then go ahead and pursue to section 2, and again I would be adding up all of the A scores and I would be indicating that in the C, and again now in section 3 all of the A's and all of the C's. So I'm going to pause now and allow you to take a few minutes to add up all of those scores to get raw totals for A's and C's for section 1, section 2, and section 3. See you in a few minutes. Welcome back. In step 4A, what you have done is you have gone ahead and you have added up all of your raw scores for each section for the A boxes and the C boxes. And you've indicated those raw scores again for each section, A's and C's, A's and C's, A's and C's for each section. So that's where you're at. We're now going to move to step 4B, which is taking these raw scores and translating them into percentiles. And how you'll be doing that is you'll be using these tables that you're seeing over here: relationship with employees, relationship with colleagues, relationship with supervisors. Each one of these tables is directly used for translating the raw scores for that respective section into percentiles. So we'll move ahead in going to step 4B to do the translation of the raw scores in percentiles. So how do we translate the raw scores into percentiles? This is where we are now at step 4B. As you know, you have raw scores. You've just completed adding up all of your raw scores and putting them in the appropriate areas. And so we have all our raw scores here. So how do we turn them into percentiles? To do that, you're going to be using these raw score numbers, and you're going to be using this table over here, which will help you translate a raw score into a percentile. So let's give this a shot here. The important thing to note when you're going to be doing this is stay each section to each section table as you do the translation. All right, so stay with relationships with employees, and when you work with these numbers, make sure that you work in the table relationship with employees. So here we go. Let's take 41, which is a raw score, and what will that translate into a percentile? Well, if we come over here to this table, which is about the relationship with employees, we remember that 41 is exposure score. So I look for the column exposure raw score, and I look for 41 right here, and I move from left to right into the percentile column, and it becomes a 90 percentile. So we put a 90 here because we've just translated that. We take the 31 in feedback and we come over here to this column and we look for 31, and we move from right to left and it becomes a 50. We would then continue on with doing section 2 and section 3, taking the raw scores and finding the percentile in the chart for both exposure and feedback and indicating those. And here is an illustration of that. We'll do one more. 33 in section 2 with colleagues. Coming over to the table, we look for 33 in exposure here, moving left to right, and it becomes a 70. 29 is the raw score. Again, staying in this table on colleagues, we look at the feedback score of 29, and we find that here in this column, moving right to left, we find that the percentile translation is a 30, and we indicate that. And that's what we would also do for section 3. When all of the sections are done, you have then translated all of the raw scores into percentiles. Just remember, as you get ready to do this, to be sure that you work each section with its appropriate table, and they line up this way to help you out. That's really important because the numbers change in each of these tables. So you want to work with the right table to the right section. We're going to stop now or pause and allow you to go ahead and change all of your raw scores, or translate them, excuse me, into your percentiles. Well, welcome back. We're now moving into step 5. And this really is the final piece of scoring and then plotting out your scores for the self-assessment. Then to be followed up with step 6, which is beginning the interpretation of that information. Now you'll start some of that interpretation with a little bit of reading and looking back at your own material, but we'll pick this up in class and spend a little more time on the interpretation, making sure that everybody is fully cognizant of what your scores are saying and indicating. So again, here we are at step 5. In step 5, to do the plotting on the graph sheets or sections, you're only going to use the percentiles for each section. And the way this works is you're going to be taking the percentile, say 90 is exposure, and if you look, this is an axis here. Exposure runs along this part of the axis, and feedback runs along this part of the action. So if I have a 90 percentile in exposure in this particular section, I would look over here and I would be looking along this axis to find the 90, and it happens to be right about here.